actually connecting today in quite an odd time. We were just talking before we started this recording, right? That it's the first time in years that you can remember that you're actually not traveling to the next destination. That and this is what, of course, COVID has done to many of us. It has literally grounded us, if you will, to the spot, into to our homes. And it's quite a strange situation. And I think before we also start talking a little bit more about the subject matter of today, which is your book, borrowed from your grandchildren, which in this current context actually is a very important work that I highly recommend people read in these times. But before we do so, Dennis, I think it would be wonderful for us to hear from your end how you see the situation evolve in where you are operating, and how also family businesses around you have been affected, and what kind of reactions you've seen around you.
Well, I don't have a good picture because I'm in my place, and I think all of us are a little bit isolated, and information is not flowing the way we've been used to. But what I think of about family businesses, or as I say, family enterprises, because a lot of them have sold the business and are partners as a family in different ways, in a broader way than just one business. But families are looking, and in the time of uncertainty, they're saying, what resources do we have? What do we have to fall back on? And what a family has as a collective is much more than an individual or an individual household has. The families that I interviewed for my book, and I interviewed 100 global families that were past the third generation and successful as both families and businesses. These families have resources that are non-financial. They have a closeness. They have a shared purpose. They have shared assets. They have entities, public entities, charities, foundations, private entities, businesses. They have cash, and all of these are subject to the family resources, where there are a set of values, and the values are about long term, and the values are about not just being me personally as a family, but the idea of family in these businesses is a very flexible one. And people say family, and then they say, well, family includes the families that have worked for our business for generations. Yes. Families include our employees and our staff, because how could we be making profit and these people that have been so dedicated to us, not be part of it? And if we have a challenge, how can we all meet it together? So I see family enterprises as having incredible resources that they can apply to this, and the families that I have been talking to are actively not just kind of personally involved, but getting together and saying, what do we want to do to move this forward? And there's a real sense of community, kind of a caring community emerging.
In this current situation, we seem to be paying a debt for the short-termism that has been practiced in capitalism around the world over the last few decades. Why is it that the family business model, or these family business, or the family values in business have not been able to penetrate through that thinking over the last few decades? What was that? And did we really have to come to this precipice now in the 21st century, as you said, to potentially change our outlook? Like, what is it that you feel like was the main driver, and why can't family businesses, I guess, be heard as much as, your GEs and those big companies that have been defining the dialogue around management best practice for the last few decades? Like, what do you think that is about family businesses, that they can't really cut through that noise and make that statement and show?
Well, the first thing is, and this is a little bit of a stepping up on a soapbox, so I'm saying, I think that business schools in the last half of the 20th century were really premised on rationality, and they were actively opposed to family businesses. So they presented a rational business, and they said rational self-interest will help us, and businesses should the Milton Friedman approach that businesses are about profitability for the shareholders and nothing else. And they presented an ethic of rationality that had no kind of soul and respect for people. And I think now we're seeing the pitfalls of that as the large rational companies. We find that one of the things about rationality is they think it's rational to get short-term profits for the shareholders over long-term investment. They say, "Hey, I'll sell my shares after I get get my dividends and profits out. So why look ahead?" So there isn't an incentive for that now. The challenge that we face, I think, and this is a long-term kind of social theory, is what we call the challenge of the commons. And this is something that everybody knows is real, but nobody takes seriously, which is the fact that if there is public lands, there public services, things like that, if you look at your short-term interest and you overgraze, the environment gets decayed and everybody loses in the future. And so the issue was, who's responsible? It first came up in terms of waste. Who's responsible for waste? We thought you could just dump it and that's not a cost at all. Now we're seeing that that's a cost. We're saying who's responsible if we use up all of the rare minerals or all of all of the oil? Is that responsible? What about, we're seeing now that a scarce resource is water. Can everybody have the water that they need to do all the things that they do? Well, there may be some priorities and there may be some questions. So now people have to look at shared responsibility for things that they didn't look at before, and these things become costs. Family businesses in the second, third generation, they learn collaboration because they have family owners that they have to get along with who are relatives, and they learn how to be cooperative. And they also, because they're human beings first before they're profit making entities, they care about other people in a different way. And they say, people have been helping, one family member said, the people in our community, the people who are employees, have given a great gift to us over the years. They've created tremendous wealth for us. We owe them. This is maybe not a concept you hear in a lot of Western companies, but this is certainly an Eastern view. And we owe these people. So we are all in it together, and we have to serve them.
And again, just to relate this to the context that we're having this conversation in, us both being basically in isolation, you at your end of the world, me at the other. I think it's a very interesting time for us to actually review the family business model in how it also responds to this kind of extraordinary situation. Because it's, of course, one thing to be able to be planning for the long term and to apply innovation and entrepreneurship when there are no extraordinary circumstances. But in times of crises, the question becomes, does tradition now get into the way of family business adapting at the speed they're going to have to adapt in order to survive this particular circumstance? Because we now also see that the kind of response that is required now from family businesses is, of course, an extraordinary effort. Many of them are now suffering from the deficiencies they already had, but they thought they had time to tackle, like lack of governance, lack of digitalization, all of those things. So it's really quite interesting to see here now. So you were talking about resiliency coming from shared values, shared purpose. But what when the circumstances are this exceptional? Can these things that are also anchoring us in tradition, that are also anchoring us in we're doing things a certain way, can they now be a hindrance to respond in, at the speed that is clearly required in this particular situation?
Well, that's a complex issue, but it came up a lot in the research. The fact is that a family is inherently conservative. A family is not designed to change. It's designed to create stability and continuity. So it's hard to change a family. But the families in the study had an approach, because there are also parts of the family that are more innovative. So I talk about a concept that I call the generative alliance, which is the value creating alliance in the family. And it goes like this. There's the older generation, and they have some values. For example, one value of the older generation that's been tremendously important is to not take out all the money from the business, but to reinvest. And I think family businesses routinely reinvest more than some public companies. So that they haven't been living 100% off 100% of the profits. They've been living off maybe sometimes 20% of the profits, which means they've been reinvesting and they have resources in the business. But the innovation is there are three groups, interest groups, stakeholder groups that identify in the family. The elders, who have control, but they're concerned about the future. They're conservative, yes. But then they've hired business advisors, they've hired non-family executives who are experts, who are supposed to rationalize and professionalize the business and make the business more effective. So these are people that have created profitable business. But again, these people, because they're beholden to the older generation, and their mission is to bring returns to the business, not to be innovative. And they do a little bit of innovation, but they're not the most innovative. But then you have a third resource in the family, and this is where the innovation comes from. That's the new generation, the people that are educated all over the world, the people that are seeing the environmental crisis, that are part of the tech response, that see some of the challenges that are ahead. And the new generation, they in the family business, they're in an interesting position because they don't have legitimacy, they don't have ownership, but they have a voice because they can walk right in to the leaders, and the leaders are their parents, and say, we want to see this, and we want to have social values, and we want to invest in the future. And they're the children.
Doesn't always work. It doesn't always work from experience.
Well, but it's a dialogue. But the families that are successful are open to it, and they say, well, let's listen to the ideas. We're not going to do everything you want. You're 25 years old, and you've got to do a little bit of seasoning and a little bit of learning, but we'll listen. And there's what I call a respectful engagement in the next generation, not giving away the store, but the older generation, the business advisors and non-family, and the next generation have different worldviews and different perspectives. And in the successful multi-generational family, you see these three groups working together, accommodating each other, respecting each other, listening to each other,